Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Telescope Podcast.
What's up, everybody? Everyone in this place, if you can do a handstand, I want to see your feet up in the air right now. Wave them around, that's right.
Hello, welcome to the Telescope Podcast, the show where we look at geek culture through the spyglass of faith. My name is Matthew Seipel Anderson, and it is a pleasure to be speaking to you again. Well, if you've ever been online, you are familiar with online advertising. And online advertising has gotten very sophisticated in the past few years. They now use your browsing history, as you know, to serve up content that you might be interested in, based on what you are looking at. And it can be super annoying sometimes because, they serve up stuff that you actually want, like you're on there looking at a new guitar and all of a sudden that new guitar is following you around, talking to you. And you can't afford it, but that's all right. Well, sometimes they are extremely, extremely annoying. And in one case, for me, where they were extremely, extremely annoying, was when I was doing research for this show on a topic of niche dating sites. I had seen this article in the Chicago Tribune that went through all these crazy dating sites that exist, and they're very specific. I mean, things like people with STIs, people who smoke weed, atheists. There's even one for people who like guys with beards. Okay, then there's a bunch more. There's a whole bunch of these. And so it made me laugh, and I thought this would be a funny topic for the show, and I started to dig into it and look for some more because I suspected, and rightly so, that there would be some of these sites for nerdy things, like Star Trek, for example, or love of Marvel movies, or whatever. And there are those sites out there, and I was finding them, and it was cracking me up, and I was thinking, man, I can have so much fun talking about this on the show. Well, then, I'm sitting in bed with my wife, putzing on the computer after doing all this research, and I'm just looking at whatever, and all of a sudden, I'm getting these pop-up ads for, beautiful, exotic women. And obviously, they're not true dating sites. Some kind of sleazy escort service or something, and it was very awkward. But my wife and I actually had a pretty good laugh about it. So I thought I would share the story online. That episode is not going to happen. Maybe it just did in a very abbreviated form. But you've got to hand it to the people who invent all this stuff on the internet. It is pretty sophisticated, or is it? In fact, you could make the case that it's not even designed at all. You could say, well, my browsing history, was briefly had some of those dating sites, but it is loaded with other stuff because I never delete my browsing history. It is loaded with other stuff, like guitar stuff and tons of Google searches for Bible verses because I always do that for my messages every single Sunday. And, why didn't it pick up on that? That's a pretty obvious flaw. I don't know. And I'm clearly interested in nerdy sites and nerdy dating sites. Why did it give me the exotic foreign woman sites? And the other thing is those ads can be super intrusive. And if those ads make me leave the website where they're trying to advertise to me, isn't that counterproductive and go against what they should be trying to accomplish? And if those were designed, wouldn't they be designed to keep people there? Now, I know you're listening to me, and it's kind of a ridiculous case I'm making because they're obviously designed, and my arguments are not, very strong. But I bring it up because I found this article for our science segment. Intelligent design? How come he made so many blunders? That is the title of an article by Robin McKee, and it's an article he wrote in response to an astronaut named Tim Peake, who said that he thought the universe could be the result of divine creation. His exact quote is, "I'm not religious, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I don't seriously consider that the universe could have been created from intelligent design." And so this author goes on to say, look, the idea of intelligent design is intellectually rotten, and it's even dangerous. And he, goes through and makes the argument. So I want to bring out a few things in this article and make a few comments because this is an article that postures as if it's a scientific critique, but in reality, it's nothing more than a philosophical or even a theological argument. So here's some quotes, or a section, I should say, not just a short quote. It's a section from the article itself. It says, creationists say natural selection cannot explain the wonders and complexity of the eye. I should break in here. He uses the eye as an example because it's a common one that intelligent design people and creationists use. Okay, here goes the quote again. It must have been designed by a divine entity, they claim. How else could you explain how it coordinates the behavior of each of its 125 millimeter photoreceptor cells to provide us with vision that has color and depth? It is too complex to have evolved through random physiological changes, they say. In fact, the evolution of the human eye was a basic business. It evolved from simpler versions that in turn evolved from even simpler eyes that in turn evolved from basic light sensors. That is how natural selection operates. It acts on existing features of animals' bodies and slowly induces change that can eventually result in a new species. And then he goes on to make an argument that is a common one in atheistic circles. He talks about how our eyes deteriorate over time. We get short-sighted, we can develop glaucoma, cataracts, go blind. And there's a quote in the article from biologist Matan Salomi. Who designed these faulty things? The answer can't be God, because a God so incompetent in designing vision sensors isn't worth worshiping. In other words, the human eye, far from proving there was a divine creator, is a clear pointer to his or her non-existence. So a lot could be said about this article, but I don't want to belabor the point, so I'm just going to make a few quick comments. Number one, it's interesting that he admits that a lot of things in nature appear designed, particularly when he talks about the eye and how bad of a design the eye is. It's interesting that he intuitively uses the language of design. And it appears kind of like a scientific argument, but really it's a philosophical or theological argument because he's looking at a design and saying, well, this design could be better. Therefore, an all-knowing, all-powerful God wouldn't have made it this way. So he's making a judgment call about a design, but it's interesting to me to note how the terminology of design sneaks its way into the article. So I think that's very interesting. Now, when you ask a question like, why would a God make designs that, degrade or lose their function over time? You're asking a theological question. And for Christians, the answer is multifaceted. But really, it's the fall, the temporal nature of this world, God's express plan to establish a more permanent world someday in the future, right? So there's a lot of theological things that theological answers to that question. So design is one thing that you talk about, and then why is a separate question. And they're kind of they are being completely muddled together here. And you can look at any design and you can poke holes in it. All design includes compromises, right? Like you could look at a spoon and say, what a terrible instrument, because you can't use it to stab food with. You can look at a fork and you can say, what a terrible instrument. You can't scoop really well with it. It has holes. And you could look at a spork and you could say, what a terrible design. In trying to scoop and poke, you can't do either very well. And so, you can take a cynical view and poke holes and think of, things to say that are negative about any type of design. But I think the bigger question is, why is there an eye in the first place? What process could go against the stream of entropy and create the complex specified information required to make even a single-cell organism? And the answer is they have no answer. At least they have no answer that involves purely naturalistic processes. So design is alive and well. The design argument has been around for millennia. It may be out of vogue in certain intellectual circles, and it may be mocked, but it is alive and well. Well, don't panic, everyone. We are to our feature content, which is all about Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It is a classic work in the sci-fi fantasy genre, and it was fun reading it, or I guess listening to it if you want to be more specific. I found it very amusing, super witty, awesomely ridiculous, and I could definitely see why it's been so influential and well-loved. Now, being that this is a show about geek culture and faith, for people of faith, for Christians listening, it is a little crass at points. I didn't listen to it much with my kids, but it's about at the same level as watching like a primetime TV show. Put it that way, It's not extremely dirty or graphic or anything, but it gets a little crass at times. All right, so philosophically, this is the most interesting part about this. For me anyways, was the kind of the underlying philosophy. The story is it's super funny, it's ridiculous, and Douglas Adams' writing is hilarious. But this is definitely the product of an atheistic mind. And, in the last episode, I talked about Bertrand Russell's philosophy of despair. And this is it. This book, this is it. This is a work that is completely founded on that way of thinking. And, when you hear the phrase philosophy of despair, I mean, it brings pictures of, depressed people to mind or something. But that's not necessarily what they were getting at or what Russell was getting at. He didn't want people just to be, depressed all the time. But it's more of coming to grips with the fact that there is no ultimate purpose or meaning to this world or even this universe or our lives, except maybe the meaning that we give to them. And just coming to grips with that the universe doesn't care about us, and putting your life on that foundation is what Bertrand Russell was talking about. And so that's what this book's really all about. So today I'm going to bring out a little section that I was particularly amused by, and it ties in great with our science segment. It ties in great with a lot of the stuff we talk about all the time in this show. So it's a section on the Babel Fish. Now, the Babel Fish is from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy story. The Babel Fish is kind of like the universal translator in Star Trek, right? Except it's actually a fish that you put inside your ear. And this little article, this is actually a quote from the book, explains how it works. It goes like this. The Babel Fish is a small, yellow, leech-like, and probably the oddest thing in the universe. It feeds on brain wave energy received not from its carrier, but from those around it. It absorbs all unconscious mental frequencies from this brain wave energy to nourish itself with. It then excretes into the mind of its carrier a telepathic matrix formed by combining the conscious thought frequencies with nerve signals picked up from the speech centers of the brain which has supplied them. The practical upshot of all this is that if you stick a babblefish in your ear, you can instantly understand anything said to you in any form of language. The speech patterns you actually hear decode the brainwave matrix, which has been fed into your mind by the babblefish. Now, it is such a bizarrely improbable coincidence that something so mind-bogglingly useful could have evolved purely by chance that some thinkers have chosen to see it as a final and clinching proof of the non-existence of God. The argument goes something like this. I refuse to prove that I exist, says God, for proof denies faith, and without faith I am nothing. But, says man, the babblefish is a dead giveaway, isn't it? It could not have evolved by chance. It proves you exist. And, by your own arguments, you don't. Oh dear, says God, I hadn't thought of that, and vanishes in a puff of logic. Oh, that was easy, says man, and for an encore, goes on to prove that black is white, and gets himself killed on the next zebra crossing. Mostly in leading theologians claim that this argument is a load of dingo's kidneys, but that didn't stop Ulan Kufid from making a small fortune when he used it as the theme of his best-selling work. Well, that about wraps it up for God. The whole argument runs roughly as follows. 1. God refuses to prove that he or she exists because proof denies faith, and without faith, God is nothing. Number 2. Man then counters that the babblefish is a dead giveaway because it could not have evolved by chance. So the fish proves that God exists, but hence also, by God's own reasoning, see number 1, that God does not exist. Number 3, God says that she hadn't thought of that, and promptly disappears in a puff of logic. Man then remarks about how easy it was and gets himself killed on the next pedestrian crossing. So that really gives you a flavor for how the whole book goes. And it's obviously super funny, but it's only meant to be sort of funny. Now, a lot of atheists and agnostics say God, if he exists, hasn't provided enough evidence for himself. And to that argument, some well-meaning Christians have probably said, or I'm sure they've said, well, God wants us to believe on him and to have faith. And I guess that's true, but only to a point. I would actually say in that case, both sides of that argument are incorrect. I would say God has provided enough evidence for us to believe in him and feel very confident that he exists. But he has not provided so much evidence so that he would deny free will. And in fact, all knowledge requires faith. Think about it. If you sit down in a chair, you have faith, based on your past experience, that it's going to hold you. But there is an element of faith there. Everything we believe about history, you have to take on faith because you can go back in time and test it. In fact, you have to depend on disciplines like history to evaluate historical claims and historical evidence and decide what's true and what's false. And so much of our life entails faith. I mean, you have to have faith to be an atheist. You have to have faith to believe in the Big Bang. And you might say, well, the Big Bang has some evidence to it, like the background microwave radiation that has been emanating out along with the expansion of the universe since the dawn of time, and the fact that the universe is expanding. Well, that's true, but there's many scientific theories that have been held for a long time that then a couple hundred years down the road get overturned. But in the meantime, you look at the best evidence you have and you decide to have faith. And in the case of the Big Bang, I have to just throw out, it's a great evidence for the existence of God because it shows that once our universe did not exist and there was a moment in time when it came into existence. That's what our best science tells us. There's also the Cambrian explosion where all the animal groups came into being simultaneously or in a very small amount of geologic time. There's DNA, RNA, epigenetic information, and more, right? It's like a computer code built into your cells, into every cell. There's the historical evidence for the resurrection. Now I'm getting into specific reasons to believe in Christianity, but the historical evidence for the resurrection, the fulfilled prophecies of the Old and New Testament, the abundant ancient manuscripts that show that the earliest believers in Christ believed he was the Son of God. That Christianity didn't evolve over time, but the earliest believers believed and died for the fact that Jesus was the Son of God and he rose again. So all worldviews require faith. All knowledge requires faith. And so, this little funny philosophical aside that comes about through the discussion of the Babel Fish and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is an example of a common way of thinking that's out there that, well, God just didn't provide enough information to prove that he exists. Well, that's not true. The problem lies in us. The problem lies in us. Are we willing to believe? Are we willing to be open to the existence for God? Are we willing to open our hearts up to the reality of God? Or are we unwilling? Have we decided within ourselves that we don't believe, we don't want to believe, we don't want to live with the consequences that belief in a creator with a purpose would bring into our lives? That's the issue for most people. It's not so much intellectual. The intellectual stuff helps, and it creates a foundation. It creates greater certainty. But the biggest problem is inside our hearts. So, hey, I hope you enjoyed listening to the show. If you notice that I didn't bring forth the telescope today, it's because I pretty much just did. So I'm not even going to bother with the bring forth the telescope thing unless, you're dying to hear it. Send me an email. I'll put it in twice in the next episode. But Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, it's just like a crazy, zany romp through space. And it kind of has a weird ending. And but I don't want to give it away because I think people who are listening to this may go back and check it out. So I don't want to have too many spoilers or give the ending away. I would love to hear your thoughts. Connect with me on Facebook, My Savior's Anthem, Music and Podcasting. You can email me, mysaviorsanthem@gmail.com. That would be fantastic. Thanks so much for listening. Love you all. Take care. Bye-bye.
What's up, everybody? Everyone in this place, if you could do a handstand, I want to see your feet up in the air right now.